What is he gonna do with their grades? Everyone is like, I missed the fact that my oh, and which test would be I still don't understand the bumping. I don't get the
He's talking about stuff to do. He's like, the ideal. I was like, dude, I'm like that.
Whenever you're ready, folks, those of you who decided it was no matter how pretty out, you were going to come to class anyway. Yeah. To get your test back? I have the test with me, but take me get them after class, okay? Yeah. But if you weren't here, you may also not know. Is there anybody here who hasn't heard my little thing about how I'm going to grade the course? Sorry?
just in case.
Well, there's one student who had emailed me about it. That student may or may not be here. I don't know. Anyway, the way I'm going to grade it is that on an individual basis, your better exam will count 10 times as much as your weaker exam. Your better paper will count 10 times as much as your weaker paper. So basically, I mean, 90% of your grade, 91%, whatever it is, of your grade is the best paper and the best exam. Okay? Say that? No, you can't. Okay, time to try again. Folks! Can we have a little quiet, please? Thank you. The quicker we get started, you might get out early. You never know. Okay, so at the end of the first meditation, let me remind you of the two pieces of this. Descartes has not said that he's all worried about all of his beliefs about the world. He's shown them to be bad beliefs or whatever. What he thinks he's shown in this first meditation is just that all of his beliefs have some wild, exotic chance of being mistaken. God may be deceiving him about everything. So in particular, I mean, and that's the last big argument he comes up with. He just says, how do I know God's not just totally deceiving me? But then he decides, for the purposes of his project, to try to find some absolutely certain truths. He's not going to think that God's deceiving him, but he's going to postulate, he's going to suppose that there is instead this so-quote evil demon who's got godlike powers and is in fact deceiving him about everything that he can possibly be deceived about, even by an omnipotent being. So at the beginning of the second meditation, he's plowing on, right? He hasn't found anything yet. He's come to what looks like it might be a dead end. but he's going to continue. So he asked for early on this question. Is there not a God, or whatever I may call him, who puts into me the thoughts that I'm now having? But why do I think this, since I myself may perhaps be the author of these thoughts? In that case, am not I at least something? Right? Even if I'm getting crammed with false thoughts by God or by an evil demon or whatever, don't I have to be something in order to have a mind to be stuffed full of stuff? And then he says, I'm going to actually wind up reading you a good bit of this first half of this. But I've just said, I don't have any senses, and I don't have a body. But, okay, so what's that mean? I mean, what's the consequences of that? Am I not so bound up with a body and with senses that I can't exist without them? I mean, if I don't have a body and senses, how can I exist? But I've convinced myself that there is no physical world at all, including my body. So, the big question, does it now follow that I too don't exist? If there's no body for me to have as my body, there are no bodies at all, then doesn't that mean that there's no way for me to exist? No, it doesn't. If I convinced myself of something, then I certainly existed. I can't do stuff if I don't exist. So if I've convinced myself, if I've done anything, then I exist. In that case, but there's a deceiver of supreme power and cunning who is deliberately and constantly deceiving me. Well, in that case too, I undoubtedly exist if he's deceiving me. I can't resist reminding you of way back when we were talking about the paradox of omnipotence. Descartes' on my side here, right? You can't have contradictions being true. So it can't be true that I'm being deceived and that I don't exist. Right? Those two things don't fit. So even if I'm being massively deceived by whomever, I have to exist. Right? And so at the end here, after considering everything very thoroughly, I must finally conclude that this proposition, I am or I exist, is necessarily true whenever it is put forward by me or conceived in my mind. Okay, so here's what he's claiming, is that there's no way, he just formulates the same proposition two different ways. There's no way that this can be false, okay, if I'm thinking at all. If I'm thinking, then there's something doing the thinking, namely me. And even if I'm being deceived, that's a form of thought, and so I exist. Now, in the Meditations, you don't find the famous Cartesian formula, but I will write it up there for you. Cogito ergo sum is he's writing in Latin, so that's the Latin. I think, therefore I exist. The mere fact that he's thinking, even if everything he's thinking is deceptive, means that he has to exist, right? That's something about which, he's saying in effect that he can't be mistaken about, right? To make a mistake, you have to exist. Right? And so in this particular case, you can't be mistaken. Right? That I exist as long as I'm thinking is guaranteed. It follows from the fact that I'm having thoughts, however good, bad, indifferent they may be. If I'm having thoughts, then I exist. Well, what he does in the rest of the second meditation is to say, what is this I, or this me, that I claim exists? Right? What exactly is it? He goes through various possibilities. What he proposes, let me I read you a little bit here. So I must be on my guard against carelessly taking something else to be this I. I mean, I might think, well, this I that exists must be this thing or whatever. I got to be careful I don't screw up like that. So I'm going to go back and think about what I originally thought I was, right? Before all this folder all started. What was I? How did I originally think of myself? What was I? And then from that picture that I used to have, I'm going to subtract all the stuff that I'm now imagining is false and see what's left over. Right? That's the procedure he goes through here. So I mean, this is worth just sort of following him. He's being very systematic here. He's got lots and lots of philosophical enemies that he's got to persuade, and he wants to make sure he touches all the bases. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but it's just to see where he goes. So the first thing he says, what is a man? Shall I say a rational animal? That's a good target for him to pick right off the bat, because that's Aristotle's definition of man. It's a rational animal. But Descartes says no. If I say, yeah, I'm a rational animal, then I'm going to have to ask what an animal is, and I'm going to have to figure out what being rational is, and that's going to lead to a whole lot of more questions, and I'm going to go down the slippery slope, and I'm just going to be lost. So he rejects that idea as, I mean, what he's really doing is objecting to a philosophical theory of what a human being is, right? That's not really what he wanted to be doing in the first place, but he had to at least mention that because Aristotle was God in the philosophical world for close to 2,000 years. So he says, instead, I'm going to concentrate on what came into my thoughts spontaneously and quite naturally whenever I used to consider what I was. So I'm not going to think about some fancy theory. I'm just going to remind myself how I used to think of myself, what sort of a being I was. The everyday, ordinary way that people have of thinking of what they are. And here is the first thought. The first thought to come to mind is that I had a face, hands, arms, the whole mechanical structure of limbs which could be seen in a corpse, and which I called the body. Okay, so it may be maybe a little puzzling why that's the first thing that occurs to him. But obviously we all think of ourselves as having bodies. And so that's the first thing he mentions. I'm a being that has a standard, more or less standard human body. And he doesn't have any objections to thinking about that. Then he says the next thought was that I was nourished. Right? I found stuff to keep myself going. And I moved around. And I engaged in sense perception. I mean, I saw things, I heard things. And thinking. And all of these things I attributed to the soul. Okay? So Descartes got two things going here. There's the body, which is just physical. It's like you can still see the whole body when the person's dead. That's the body, right? It's no longer a person, but it's a body. The other thing he thinks he's got is a soul. There's something in a human being that is responsible for all kinds of activities and stuff that it does. Bodies aren't capable of moving themselves even. A physical body is just a hunk of stuff. Right? A corpse can't move itself. It's just a body. You've got to have a soul, right? Whatever we might think of it as. We're not necessarily going to think of it as a soul, but there's got to be some kind of agent that actually does things with that body. You walk, you do whatever. I thought of these things that I attributed to the soul. But as to the nature of this soul, either I didn't think about this, or else I imagined it as something like a wind or a fire or ether that permeated my more solid parts. Right? It doesn't have a clear picture of the soul. It's just whatever it is that allows you to deliberately do things, right? To move around and to find some food and to go investigate, to go do some observations of whatever interests you or whatever. So he's got a pretty obscure idea of what the hell the soul is supposed to be. But as to the body, however, I had no doubts about it, but I thought I knew its nature distinctly. Right? Body is clear enough. That part of me is fine. And if I'd been asked what I meant by it, I would have said something like this. By a body, I understand whatever has a determinable shape and a definable location can occupy space You can see it, you can touch it, you can hear it sometimes, whatever. But it's just this physical thing. And you can move it around. You can, not the thing inside the body, but a body is something that, a human body, you can push people around. And if you can't do it, you can get yourself a bulldozer or something and do it with something else, right? Okay, so now, having said what he's clear about, what he is just the body part. The soul is this pretty obscure thing. But now he asks, here's the question. What shall I now say that I am, when I'm supposing that there is some supremely powerful and malicious deceiver who's deliberately trying to trick me in every way that he can? Can I now assert that I possess even the most insignificant of all the attributes I've just said belong to the nature of a body, that I occupy space, that I have a certain shape? No, of course I can't, because I may be totally deceived about that. The being may be deceiving me. So then what about the stuff that I had the soul doing, like movement and sense perception? What about those? Well, this stuff surely can't happen without a body. You can't see things if you don't have eyes to see them with. You can't consume nutritious materials if you don't have a body with which to consume it. So that's gone. Right? If I don't have a body, then the body itself goes, but also the soul that I was imagining sort of was in control of the body. That's what a soul is. It's something in control of a body. If there's no body there, then there's no soul. So given this evil demon character that he's imagining, he can't think of himself as having either a body or a soul, because the demon might be deceiving him about that. And then he says finally, and what about thinking? At last I've discovered thought. This alone, this is the only thing that's inseparable from me. I may be under the illusion that I have a body, that I can move around, that I'm in control of a body. All of that is just, may be false. But what can't be false is that the one thing I can do is think. That I can't be mistaken about, as long as I'm thinking. So this is an interesting thing to see here. I am, I exist, same thing you said before. That is certain. But for how long? For as long as I'm thinking. The only time Descartes can be sure he exists is when he's thinking. And I have no idea how he thought about waking up in the morning and starting to think. If he had no dreams, whether he didn't exist during the night, never mind. The point is that the time he knows that he exists is only when he's thinking. It could be that were I totally to cease from thinking, I should totally cease to exist. He's narrowed it down. What he knows about himself is simply that he exists and that he's a thinking thing. And then he goes through this little exercise in which he says, he just asks, well, what else am I? And then he says he's going to use his imagination about maybe I'm this, maybe I'm that, which right off the bat doesn't sound like a very promising idea. And he abandons it pretty quickly. It's not a good way to go, and in fact, he pursues it for a little while. He comes back to it. Actually, let me do it slightly differently than the way he does it here. He asks this question. Look, I'm a thinking thing, and I'm imagining, I'm supposing, that I'm being deceived about an evil demon, about everything else, in particular my body. But just because I may be being deceived about that, couldn't I be a body anyway without realizing it, so to speak? Right? Couldn't that be what I am in fact? But somehow it's just, I'm prevented from realizing it by this demon who's convincing me that I'm allowing deceived about it because it's one of the things he can deceive me about, and I'm imagining that he's deceiving me about everything he can deceive me about. What Descartes does with this, finally, is to say this. What I'm interested in, right, is what I absolutely know beyond any possibility of doubt. So far, what I know is that I exist and that I'm a thinking thing. And what I can't know, it's true that it's possible, that I am, in fact, a physical thing. But that's not of any interest anymore. What I want to know is what has to be true of me, right? What I can know about myself without the possibility of being mistaken. And that does not include having a body. So then he talked about the imagination, and using the imagination as a way to try to get some insight into what kind of thing he may be doing. He finally says what he could have said at the beginning. This is about as bright an idea as deciding to go to sleep and see if you can have some dreams, and maybe you'll get some ideas in your dreams about what you might be, right? I mean, it's not a promising line of investigation to use your imagination, just make stuff up and wonder whether you're one of the things that you can imagine. So, having plowed through all of that, in anticipating in part objections that other people might make, he finally comes down to ground zero once again, and to what he knows for certain, and what he knows for certain is that he's a thinking thing. Having gone through all that and got back to the same place, right, that there's no point in thinking about anything else that I might be, because what I want to know is what I can know for certain that I am. And that's just a thing that thinks. Right? But now, you do get this question. It's like the thing with the rational animal. If I were a rational animal, what's rational mean? What's an animal, right? Well, he's saying now he's a thing that thinks. Well, what the hell's that? Right? What do I mean by saying that I'm the thing that thinks? And there you get the real meat of the second meditation. And the first thing he said, right off the bat, right, is that a thing that thinks is a thing that doubts. It doubts that some things are true. It understands things. It affirms things, right? It says certain things are true. It denies things. It's willing to do certain things. It's unwilling to do certain other things. And it also imagines various things. And it has sensory perceptions. Now, by sensory perceptions at this point, I don't trust any of these translators. Unfortunately, I don't have I haven't checked this out myself to see whether that's the best way to do it. The important thing is to understand that when Descartes now is talking about sensory perceptions, what he means is just sensory experiences. So you have visual experiences, okay? You have auditory experiences. He's calling these perceptions. It's not. In that English word, it seems to me not to be a good one to have in mind here, because he's got it. The whole idea in mind now is all he knows is he's a thinking thing. He doesn't have a body, so he doesn't have eyes. He's not perceiving things. He's having sense perceptions in the sense that he's having sensory experiences. Okay, same kind of thing that people conjure up in the Matrix, right? This is where things look a certain way to you. You're having the experiences, but the fact is it has nothing to do with reality, right? Okay, so this is what a thinking thing is. This is this list of things. Now, he actually talks about this and makes it clear, following up. So let me just read you what he says. It's having sensory perceptions, or being aware of bodily things as it were through the senses, meaning I am now seeing light. I'm hearing a noise. I'm feeling heat. But maybe I'm asleep, so all this is false. Yet I certainly seem to see to hear, and to be warmed. This cannot be false. Okay? It looks to me, right now, to me personally, as if I'm in a room with a bunch of other people. That's the kind of visual experience I'm having. It looks like I'm in a room with a bunch of people. I may not be. Right? You can have a visual experience without it actually being an experience of anything. Right? So that's the point he's making now. Right? That, in effect, what he's saying is that this stuff, this whole raft of stuff, of my actual perceptual experiences, that I'm having them, is something that even a demon can't deceive me about. He doesn't come right out and say this, but this is the whole point of this. He's finding a whole lot of other stuff that a demon can't deceive him about. There's no possibility, according to Descartes, that I'm wrong in my belief that it looks to me now as if I'm in a room with other people. Even God couldn't deceive me about that. Right? It does in fact look to me as if I'm in a room with other people, and I just can't be wrong about that. My awareness of my own subjective perceptual experiences is direct and infallible. I know just as much as I know that I exist, I know that it looks to me as if I'm in a room with other people. So what you've got here is that the demons can deceive him about all of his beliefs about the world. He could deceive me about my belief that I am in a room with other people. Right? That's something he can deceive me about. He can't deceive me about it's looking to me as if I'm in a room with other people. So the way to think of it is for every objective belief about the world that Descartes has got, he's saying, I could be wrong about that. A demon could deceive me about it. But for every one of them, there's a subjective version, right? The objective one is, I'm in a room with other people. That I could be mistaken about. The subjective one is, it looks to me as if I'm in a room with other people. And that I can't be mistaken about. Okay? But now, right, all of a sudden, Descartes got a lot of stuff in his head that he has discovered is immune to the demon. Right? All his whole age, he seems to hear all kinds of things. Now, what's weird here is that although at the beginning of the second meditation, I didn't read it, but Descartes talks about the possibility that his memories are all false. And now here, he doesn't bring his memories, the question of his memory up again. But he should. I mean, I've never understood this. It's just wild. Because what he clearly would say is, I may be wrong in my belief that I had breakfast this morning. But I can't be wrong in my belief that I seem to have had breakfast this morning. That I can't be wrong about. It seems to me I did. I seem to remember. It wasn't a very good breakfast. Maybe that's why I remember it so well, or whatever. I may be wrong about having had breakfast, but I can't be wrong about the fact that it seems to me that I did, if in fact it does seem to be that way. Right? So now you've got subjective versions of all of his beliefs about the world at present, and subjective versions of all of his memories. All of his memories may be false, but that they seem to be, the world seems to have been this way, including this morning's breakfast or whatever, is stuff that he can't, in fact, be deceived about, even by an evil demon. This is really funny. I thought fairly hard this afternoon about Descartes' discussion of the wax. I usually don't talk about it because I don't think it's worth it. But I decided I was going to do it tonight. And I'm not, because I don't think it's worth it. But let me just tell you, just in a nutshell, what Descartes does. It's not a crazy thing, but trying to follow it in detail is what's really not worth it. What Descartes says is, look, now I claim to have this first-class knowledge about quite a lot of it, actually, about how things look to me and sound to me, and how the world seems to me to have been. Right? There's a lot of stuff I can't be mistaken about. But still, I can't help thinking that this knowledge is no better than my knowledge, the knowledge I used to think I had about just about the ordinary world. And so he says, let's take an example of just a simple example of some knowledge that I had, that somebody could have, and look at it. And so what Descartes does, he imagines you've got this piece of wax, right? And you can imagine it comes from a beehive or whatever you want, because it's got a sweet smell about it, tells you. You got this piece of wax. And he says, you know, I know this thing exists, I have knowledge in some sense, and this is kind of weird to talk about this, but he knows about the presence of this piece of wax. And he said, well, what do I really know? What does my knowledge consist of? Well, it consists of the fact that the wax, that this thing is white, it has a certain smell about it, it's kind of sweet smelling. Let's suppose that it's rectangular, that it makes a noise if you rap on it, it's hard enough, it'll make some sound. Right, there are various things that you know about this piece of wax. And then Descartes says, okay, now we toss it in the frying pan, and we heat it up. Now, pretty soon it's not rectangular anymore. And if you wait a little while, it won't be sweet smelling anymore either. And if you wait a little longer, it won't be white either, it'll be brown. And it's not going to make any sound when you rap on it. You can't rap on it, your knuckle will just go into it because it's too soft. So he says, you know, everything I thought that I said was my knowledge of this piece of wax is now gone. It's got all these other features now. But it's the same piece of wax. So what does my knowledge consist of? If you're having trouble imagining how to just sort of spell out an English sentence, it's just what I know is this, that goes along with Descartes' example, you should be. It's part of the reason. But just imagine where he's thinking he has this piece of knowledge about the world in the presence of a piece of wax. But what does that bit consist in? And at first he's suggesting, well, it consists of my knowledge of its properties, right? Various properties, white and rectangular, etc. But now it doesn't have those properties anymore, and I still know it's the same piece of wax. So my knowledge of it wasn't my knowledge of those properties that I was mentioning, or it's having those properties, because it still is the same piece of wax, and it doesn't have those properties. And so what he does is to say, look, here's what my knowledge of it consists of. What I know about this piece of wax is that it is flexible and changeable in certain ways. And what he's thinking about, basically, is the geometrical fact of it, the fact of its shape. Right? And the reason he focuses on that is because the number of shapes that a piece of wax can have, you may find this hard to believe, but it's pretty close to infinite, if not infinite, depending on how you want to just, you know, you spread it out as thin as you want, you melt, right, and then you do all kinds of little teeny things to it. It's a spectacular, in any case, range of shapes that this piece of wax could take. And in fact, he says there are so many of them that even your imagination wouldn't let you realize each one of them individually. You could have this shape and this shape and this shape. You know, that's never going to explain your understanding of this wax as being able to take an indefinite number of shapes. I don't care if you go through 1 million. There's another 10 million to come of possible shapes of this stuff. So it's not your imagination picturing this thing in various shapes isn't capable of giving you this knowledge about the flexibility of the wax. This, Descartes says, your actual knowledge of what this thing is, its indefinite flexibility, is something that you know through your understanding, and it has nothing to do with your senses. Your actual first-class knowledge about this piece of wax that will hold up as defining characteristic of the wax is something which you grasp with your understanding. It's not something you can see, it's not something you can imagine. There's no way of getting this idea except by thinking about the possibilities. So this is his way of giving the understanding, as opposed to our sense perception, the top rank in what actually gets you first-class knowledge. Right? And that holds all the way through the meditations. Right? This is an intellectual endeavor to understand, to get a real understanding of what human knowledge is like, and what we have knowledge of, and why and how, and the senses. Descartes isn't hung up about the senses. He doesn't think they're defective or anything, but he thinks they're a second-class source of knowledge. They can provide you with some knowledge. For example, that the piece of wax was white at a certain time, right? That you can get through the senses. And it wasn't white at another time. You can get that too. What you can't get is the characteristic that is a permanent characteristic of the wax, namely its flexibility, the capacity it has to assume lots and lots of different shapes. Right? That's something that he claims you can't get except through the intellect, through the mind, by reason. Okay, so he draws a little moral from that, which I won't bother you with. That. Just going to give you a sense of that. It's not an uninteresting discussion, but as I say, if you go through it in detail, it's a bit painful. So, where you wind up at the end of the second meditation, where Descartes winds up, is with a body of knowledge that he is absolutely guaranteed of, that even an evil demon cannot deceive him about. Namely, that he exists, that he's a thinking thing, and then all those things about how the world seems to be to him, and all those things about, those beliefs about how the world seems to have been, the subjective knowledge of how the world seems to him to be and to have been. Okay? So he's got a lot of beliefs that that are safe, he can't be mistaken about. But now, what the question is, what's Descartes going to do with these things right now? These are the things, right, that he said when he started out, this is what he was looking for, 24-karat guaranteed truths. And he's found them. Right? He's got a whole load of stuff, of beliefs that he has convinced himself are guaranteed to be true because even an omnipotent being couldn't deceive him about them. But notice what he's got. It's all subjective stuff. Unless you want to say his existence as a thinking mind is not a subjective thing, that's fair enough, okay? But just keep in mind that it doesn't mean he's got a body. He's just a mind. Right? All that he knows is a thinking thing, which may or may not be embodied. That's neither here nor there. If he is embodied, he certainly doesn't know that he is. Not absolutely certain that he is. So nothing that he is absolutely certain of tells him anything about any world there might be outside of his own mind. Everything that's absolutely certain is the contents of his own mind, how things look to him, how things seem to have been in the past, including having had breakfast this morning, right? It's all that subjective information. So this stuff was supposed to be the foundation. Once he found the things that he couldn't possibly be mistaken about, that was supposed to be the foundation on which to build science. Right? So, but science is about the physical world. That's the kind of science Descartes got in mind. He's not going to spend the rest of his life studying his mental states. He's interested in the science about the world. So, how is he going to get from knowledge of the contents of his own mind to any conclusions about the world? I mean, how's he going to even get to the conclusion that there is a world? this disembodied mind seems to be a real possibility. After all, he's always believed in God, and God is apparently a disembodied mind. He doesn't have a physical body. So he himself may be just a disembodied mind. So how's he going to get from this subjective information to the conclusion that there's a world, or much less what that world is like, and do some serious science? Well, the answer is, for Descartes, in a nutshell, that what he has to do is to prove that God exists. From working just with this, all right, these things, I exist, right, I think, and then this vast number of subjective beliefs about how things seem to him to be. Just call them seems beliefs, if you want to. That's what he's got to work with. This is the stuff that he knows. The question is, how's he ever going to arrive at any conclusions about stuff outside of his own mind? And the idea is, his idea is, on the basis of just what's in here, plus some logic, the ability to reason, he has to be able to prove that God exists. God, now we're talking about not just any old omnipotent being, we're talking about God. And God is a morally perfect being, and so that's what he's got to prove that he exists. And God would not, in fact, allow him to be massively deceived. Right? So all of those beliefs that he's scrubbed away are going to be able to come back in, his beliefs about the world. At least lots of them are. Because he's going to prove that God exists, and God would not allow him to be massively mistaken. And then it goes on from there. So the next 4 meditations, he works out in some detail so what kind of knowledge we actually are capable of the world, and he keeps, as I said, the intellect or reason on the throne, with the sense perception being sort of the staff of the palace to assist the intellect, but the intellect is what really is going to get us knowledge of reality. Well, the way that Descartes got to this position where all he knows absolutely for certain is this stuff, is maybe not the way he got there, but where he got to. That there's really is special stuff that, well, I could be wrong about being in a room with other people, but that I can't be wrong about it's looking to me as if I'm in a room with other people. That's something that a hell of a lot of philosophers still think, that is literally, you can't be wrong about how things seem to you. Right? If your hamburger tastes moldy, then it tastes moldy. It may not be moldy, but if it tastes moldy, it tastes moldy. You can't be wrong about how it tastes to you, right? Most philosophers give these kind of beliefs a very special place, right? These are things that we know for certain. We can't be wrong about. And a lot of philosophers still think, that's really ultimately what a human being has got to go on in figuring out what the world is like. They know how it looks to them, right? And that's really the hard data that they've got about reality, is how things seem to them. And so that's the ultimate evidence that they have about what reality is like. So if you believe that, then you've got this question: how does a human being ever get out of this circle? How do you draw any conclusions about what reality is like on the basis of that very special bunch of beliefs just about the contents of your own mind? And that's not an uninteresting question. It has analogs in artificial intelligence. It's got analogs all over the place in thinking about the mind. I mean, here's an analogy to give you the sense of what this problem is like. Oh, I meant to tell you, yeah, this thing is called the problem about how to get from inside that circle to outside the circle has a name. The egocentric predicament. All my knowledge is about the contents of my own mind. How do I get from there to any conclusions about what the world is like? So here's a way to just sort of picture, in a simple-minded way, what the problem is. Imagine yourself in a room, a windowless room, ceiling, floor, 4 walls, every square inch of which just consists of pixels or cells of whatever, of the sorts you get on electronic screens, right? And you're sitting in the room, and you look at these things as much as you want to. They're flickering on and off. Sometimes they form images, sometimes they're not. They're just chaotic. But there's this constant barrage of information, of events that you're witnessing. And so the question is, how on the basis of this crazy display that just goes on and on, are you ever going to figure out, if that's all you had to work with, how would you ever figure out what was outside the room? I mean, that's not a bad analogy to think about the situation that human beings are actually in. They are born knowing nothing. They've got some sense organs. If everything's working, they've got 5 of them going to put them in contact with the outside world. But what they're aware of, what they immediately are aware of, is their own experience. And somehow they put together a picture of the world. Right? They somehow cobble together a picture of what their environment is like on the basis of what is happening, unbeknownst to them, actually in their brains, in their neuroperceptual states. And so, it's just an interesting question how that happens. Right? How I mean, yeah, let me just tack on one line to that. This room that you're imagining, you have no idea what's turning things on and off. All you see is the results. And in particular, if you think about the brain, right? It's located right inside a bony skull. It doesn't have any eyes. Can't see anything. It doesn't have ears. It's a massive nervous tissue, is what it is. That's protected from the world by this skull. And the stuff comes in. I mean, what happens is that the brain gets bombarded by the results of stimulations of the infant's nerve endings. Right, the messages run up and they get to the brain, but they don't come in even with little tags on them that say, "I'm coming from the eyes" or "I'm coming from your ears" or whatever. It's just a mass of stimuli, and that magnificent machine in your head somehow takes all those data and puts together a coherent picture of your environment. And how it does it is kind of a nice question. Okay, that's all I want to say about Descartes. Anybody want to ask me anything about it? Yes? Sorry, folks, can the rest of you be quiet just a minute, please?
Mass consensus basically regulates what is real. So, like, if I think something's happening, but these two think that something else is happening, and what they think is actually happening, right?
Somehow, I'm going to come closer to you. I'm close to hearing the question, but I didn't hear it clearly enough, so try it again.
So the mass consensus would be what's right in the world.
Mass consensus?
Basically, if I think something different than the whole class thinks one thing, but I think something different, I'm wrong and they're right. Is that basically what's happening?
What's happening where?
Well, like in the world, like if I think that this classroom is black,
Right.
everyone else knows that it's green, I'm wrong.
I mean, I'm sure. If you were black, it's not because everybody else is green, it's because it is green.
Well, yeah, but basically my perception of
Your perception. Folks, let me just say, just take 2 minutes. Hang on a second, just for 2 minutes, folks, please. We're going to be talking, starting next time, about free will, determinism, and responsibility. In your little packet of stuff, there's an argument at the back on the last sheet, which is called the hard determinist argument. And well, actually, let me take 3 minutes and just tell you what this problem is. We're now going to not be talking about, we're going to be talking about a different kind of philosophical problem. But here's a very quick exposure to the problem. If you think, let's say, most people think that the world, forget about quantum theory, just think about objects of the normal size, that the physical world is a deterministic place. That is, they think that every event that happens is caused by previous events. Okay? Just try to think, I mean, you can imagine an event which just happens, right, for no reason at all. But in fact, most people think that there's always an explanation. If something happens, we may not care, but there's an explanation. We can find out what caused it to happen. Now, if you think that about the world, then you ought to think that presumably about yourself, because you're part of the world. If, as I just do now, I brush my nose, something caused me to do that. I felt an itch, whatever. There's a causal story, a boring one maybe, but there's always a causal story. Events cause other events, and every event that happens is caused by other events. So to take, I want to take that a trivial example, which I will use more than once, just for that reason. If I let this piece of chalk go, right, it's going to fall, and what we're very strongly inclined to say is that it has to fall. Okay? Nothing else can happen. That's the nature of the world. Gravity's operating. There's nothing holding it up. It's going to fall, and it has to, because that's Mother Nature. Now, suppose that that's true of human beings. I mean, why would we be an exception? If that's true of us, then everything we do, from the trivial to the serious, is caused. And if we can say that the chalk has to do it, because that's just the way Mother Nature is, then it looks like we're going to have to say the very same thing about human beings. Right? They're physical beings, so anything they do has a physical explanation. And that means, in this way of thinking about the world, that it has to happen. The thing that caused it to happen was there, and if the cause is there, then the event has to happen. That's just like letting the chalk go means that the chalk has to fall. So you get this very nasty problem about human beings. It looks as if the whole notion that it is ever up to us in any meaningful sense to choose what to do may be a complete illusion. Sure, it feels to us as though we choose. Sometimes we think we have 6 things to choose among. You think you make a choice about whether to go to class tonight or not. Right? We make choices all the time. And it's up to us. What's going to happen next is up to us. This could happen and that could happen. And we're the one who's going to decide what happens. Well, if the deterministic picture is right, then that's bogus. It's not true that this could happen and that could happen. There's only one thing that could happen, and it's the one that's going to happen. It has to happen, just as much as the chalk has to fall. So there's the nasty picture, and there's the problem of free will and determinism. So.
You said something, I started writing, I didn't get a chance. Every objective view about the world, he talking about Descartes. You made a statement, for every objective view about the world, yeah, he's something, I forgot to say.
It could be false. The demon might be deceiving. So all of his objective beliefs about the world could be false.
Really? I've been here
Like the belief that he's in a room with other people, right? Right. But the subjective one matches that it looks like he's in a room with other people. That couldn't be false. That's the idea. Oh, sorry. Go.
And on our other, do you have any more of those, the packets that give us the,